Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Very Cold Lasagna Podcast. I'm your host, Dylan Lasagna, bringing you all the filthy casual takes on the world of sports for you sports fans out there like you and me. This is episode number 337, and in this episode, we're here to continue along our NFL 2025 season team recaps, breaking down all 31 teams in the National Football League and how they did or didn't do from this past year around the league. So, yeah, we're continuing along our series here, and this is part number 3. And in case you missed the last two parts from the last 2 episodes, after this one, make sure to do some catching up as we continue along this series. So, we already did 12 teams in this series. Those teams were the Raiders, the Jets, the Cardinals, the Titans, the Giants, the Browns, the Commanders, the Saints, the Chiefs, the Bengals, the Dolphins, and the Cowboys. So we're about more than a quarter way through our little series here. And then after this episode, after this part, we'll be halfway, a little bit more than halfway through our team recaps. So for those of you new to Very Cold Lasagna or unfamiliar with how we do our NFL season team recaps, just give you a brief synopsis if you missed the beginning of our team recap series. So how we do it here on Very Cold Lasagna is that we divide up our season team recaps. Obviously, we do it with all 31 teams. I exclude one specific one, which is my San Francisco 49ers, because we've already done a dedicated specific episode for them, a recap episode, and what they did right, what they did wrong last month. So we divide all 31 teams into however many parts we need to do, and we go from the worst to the best. And yeah, we try to split them up the best that we can, so we're not here forever in one episode. And yeah, like I said, we talk about the best and the worst of what went right, what went wrong for all these teams from this past year, which was 2025. And look at how they're doing in their current offseason and what I personally feel each team needs to do to try and have a better 2026, especially given the teams that we previously talked about, like all 12 teams that we talked about. I mean, this part's going to be no different, clearly, given the set of teams that we're going to be looking at here today. So with that being said, let's waste no more time. Let's get into part 3 of our 2025 NFL season team recaps. Beginning part 3 of our NFL season team recaps, the 2025 edition, we head down south to the ATL to talk about the Atlanta Falcons, where at this point in time last year, its fan base and the team were sort of intrigued for this past season, entering it at least, not because of missing the playoffs again. After in 2024, they blew the division away after midway through the season. They were 3-0 in the division, including sweeping a certain division rival halfway through, but then they collapsed after that. But it was because of a final 3-game stretch that saw promise from their then rookie quarterback that they drafted 7th or 8th overall several months prior in the NFL draft, Michael Penix Jr. The same Michael Penix Jr. that supplanted the quarterback that Atlanta had signed to a big fat contract 2 off seasons ago, Kirk Cousins. Yeah, also the same Kirk Cousins that was still coming off a torn Achilles that he suffered with the previous team that he was on in his final season, the Minnesota Vikings. And yeah, he was also caught off guard with that draft move. But rambling aside, this team at this point in time last year in the offseason, they were intrigued by how Michael Penix Jr. played, at least trying to somewhat keep their very slim playoff hopes alive, and what it was going to provide in a full offseason of preparation for what was going to be him being the starter. So as they went along through last offseason, while Penix was able to get a full offseason's worth of work, The front office, unfortunately, they solely focused on revamping up Raheem Morris's defense, which wasn't necessarily a bad thing because that was a weak point last year with additions like Divine Diablo, Leonard Floyd, and Morgan Fox in free agency. And then when you look at the draft, they got Jalen Walker and James Pierce in the draft. So they improved the front seven on paper, at least. That was going to be much better because that was one of their biggest weaknesses. They didn't have a pass rush, or at least barely of one. But the thing was they didn't address the full defense. They only addressed that part. The defensive backfield was still a major concern. And then when you look at the offense, this was Penix's, again, his full starting season coming up. There were plenty of question marks around the team, and as well as Penix's very small sample size from the year prior. And all he had to work with on offense was Drake London, Kyle Pitts, and Bijan Robinson. Two of those three guys are still premier players in that Atlanta offense. And Atlanta didn't really do anything to provide more help around Penix Jr. in his actual full year. So when you look at the regular season for Atlanta, Michael Penix Jr.'s for a full season as a starter, it was filled with inconsistency. He did well at times with precise, inaccurate passes to his guys like London and Bijan. And you saw that starting in week 1 against Tampa Bay in a close but a short loss to Tampa Bay, especially when he was throwing the ball downfield, using his mobility to extend drives. And yeah, you also saw glimpses of that when they played the Commanders and the Bills in back-to-back weeks. But then he would also have spurts, this disappearing and throwing weirdly inaccurate passes or getting outplayed by certain defenses. And not just certain defenses, like any kind of defense. So he was kind of like very on and off. You get the good Michael Penix 1 week, and then you get the bad one in the next week. So it was not just that inconsistency from Penix on the field. He was also dealing with some health concerns as well because he missed a game with an ankle injury that lingered throughout the rest of the time that he was there, because he didn't play the rest of this. He didn't play a full season because in week 11 he partially tore his ACL in the third quarter against the Carolina Panthers at home. And that ended his season, and that forced Kirk Cousins back into the starting lineup. So unfortunately for Penix Jr., there were some good things about him, but there still remains plenty of question marks coming out of this season for the second-year first-round pick. And then when you look at the passing defense for the Falcons, pretty much a need from last offseason. It bit them in the butt here. They had trouble guarding against opposing receivers. Once again, AJ Terrell, their really good lockdown corner, he was struggling here because he had no one else to help him out on the other side. And the only other good player on the secondary was Jesse Bates. But he's a safety, and he covers the deep end middle of the field. But even then with this passing defense of Atlanta, I mean, they weren't at least the worst. Or one of the worst in the NFL, because there are plenty of teams that were pretty bad with their own backfields, but it's still not great, or let alone good per se. I'd say it's average, below average. I guess you can describe that Atlanta passing defense. So yeah, the season went kind of off the rails for Atlanta once Michael Penix Jr. Went down. But they were already in the midst of a 5-game losing streak. But when you look at some of the things that were good about Atlanta's season, you got to look at tight end Kyle Pitts. He was not what Atlanta expected when they drafted him in the first round in 2021, and especially in the years progressed up until this point, because when you got to the second half of the season, he started to play much better. We found himself more open in routes. For Kirk Cousins, when he played with him, he showed speed and elusiveness that the Falcons were hoping to see when they drafted him back a couple years ago. and he had a career high season. And one of the biggest instances was a 3-touchdown breakthrough game in Week 15 when they upset the Tampa Bay Bucks in prime time. So Kyle Pitts really had a nice late season resurgence. And then when you look at how the defense did play, for as many faults as they have there in the passing defense, they played much better down the stretch. They showed what they could have been at times early in the year, but it was in the last month of the season where this unit notched multiple turnovers, multiple sacks. They had a lot of good pass breakups, including a big game against Matthew Stafford and the Rams in Week 17. Even if they almost blew that game, being a typical Atlanta being an Atlanta game. So overall, I mean, this Atlanta defense, I'd say it played pretty well for itself defensively. And then, of course, you got Bijan Robinson in his second year, played pretty good for himself, whether it was Penix or Cousins under center. He showed just how important he was to the offense all season long with his rushing ability and as well as his receiving ability, being this all-purpose back. So overall, when you look at this Falcons team, it was another disappointing season for them, which started out with promise with this, what was it, 4-2 of 4-1 start for them. But inconsistency and the season-ending injury to Penix Jr. in the midst of a 5-game losing streak, bad passing defense, and there's some questionable coaching decisions from Raheem Morris that pretty much drowned all that. They did, though, finish off with a positive 4-game winning streak in the last month of the year, including 2 upset wins over the Bucks and the Rams, which was nice for them, along with a season finale win over the Saints, which, ironically enough, given how the Bucks and the Panthers looked in the final frame, yeah, they were the deciders of that division. And, also given how the Bucks and the Panthers played in the last month of the season, had Michael Penix Jr. stayed healthy and had, Raheem Morris coached better, as they continued to progress throughout the rest of the season, had those things contributed well better, I think the Falcons would have won this weak division. So unfortunately, that didn't come to fruition for Atlanta. They finished once again at 8-9, and even with a good finish to the season, Raheem Morris, along with general manager Terry Fontenot, they were shown the door. They got fired, and yeah, Arthur Blank started off fresh again. He brought in a former Browns head coach who recently got fired too, Kevin Stefanski, and he brought in a new general manager by the name of Ian Cunningham from the Chicago Bears. They were the new duo to help reorganize this Falcons team. Also joining them was a familiar face that Atlanta fans will recognize, and that is quarterback and CBS analyst Matt Ryan. He joined in a highly critical role as president of football. So you got a familiar face and a familiar voice in Matt Ryan that should, I think, at least greatly help Arthur Blank in this new GM head coach duo. So this trio has a good opportunity to turn the proper page around on this team. But the thing is, that's at least on paper, and they'll be missing one of the resources to start on that. And why do I say that? Well, when you look at the offseason that is coming up for Atlanta, they have a decent amount of cap space. That's the one good thing that Atlanta has working with them when they're going to spend in free agency around $26 million. But here's the kicker when it comes to the NFL draft. They don't have a first-round pick, and that was because of Terry Fontenot's fuck-up last year. It was supposed to be the 13th overall pick, but because of last year's screw-up, trying to trade up to the first round and giving up a first-round pick, that pick goes to the LA Rams. And they don't have that many draft picks this year in the NFL draft. They only have 5 total draft picks. So not a lot of real estate room to get any rookies here. When you're looking at some of the key free agents for the Falcons, they already got one of them settled in, at least for right now, and that was Kyle Pitts. They franchise tagged him a little while back. You look at linebacker Caden Ellis, defensive lineman David Onyemata, and Arnold Kibai. I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing that. Safety Ronnie Harrison and backup running back Tyler Algier. That's one of the key pieces to the offenses. Looking at some of the needs that they have to address this offseason, I think one of them has to be finding a backup quarterback behind Michael Penix Jr. Why is that? Well, that's because Atlanta is planning to release Kirk Cousins from that big fat contract. And that's a contract that Atlanta's regretting, at least from the previous regime. Yeah, they plan on releasing him next week at the start of the new league year to free up $22 million in spending money. Yeah, just start fresh. Once that becomes official, they need to find a backup quarterback in the event that Michael Penix gets hurt again or he starts underperforming. And then as we stay on the offensive side of the ball, they have to address the receiver room because this was unaddressed last year, and that became profound this past season, especially in games where Drake London was out and there's pretty much no receiving attack for Kirk Cousins to go to. Kyle Pitts was the only one, but he's not a downfield threat. But at least when it comes to this offseason, it's ongoing. He was franchise tagged as they continue to work on a long-term deal. But Penix Jr., he needs more downfield targets. So they need some more depth behind Kyle Pitts. And they also need 2 more starters. Defensively, it's going to be another need again. The secondary. This was another unaddressed need from last year. And the Falcons have a really good front seven. They got a pass rush, which showed late in the year. But again, they got to get some help in the defensive backfield. So Matt Ryan, they seem to have gotten the head coaching hire right, as well as the GM right. So Kevin Stefanski should be of good help for Michael Penix Jr., just as long as Penix can stay healthy. So if this trio addresses help for both Penix Jr. and the defensive backfield, despite their limited resources in the draft and so cap space, I think Atlanta could be in the mix of a still weak NFC South. The Baltimore Ravens were once again one of the preseason AFC favorites to go to the Super Bowl despite a close loss to the Bills in the 2024 divisional. But to get back there, though, they need to fix some things on both sides of the ball that hurt them in that game. And I'm not talking about drop by Mark Andrews on the 2-point conversion. There were still plenty of problems besides that. So in this point in time last year in the offseason, they added backfield help with the drafting of standout safety Malachi Starks to help out Kyle Hamilton and edge rusher Mike Green to help out the front seven to get that pass rushing going. Meanwhile, offensively, they got various help via signing DeAndre Hopkins, which was an interesting move to say the least. They also drafted offensive linemen Emory Jones and Carson Vincent, who give that front five, which was 50-50 around Lamar Jackson in 2024, a little bit some depth. Whether it's going to be good depth, that remains to be seen. So entering the season, the Ravens had one of the hardest schedules this past year, but with the balanced roster on tap, at least going into it, they could go on to a run as long as Lamar Jackson could finally figure it out, especially in clutch time. Unfortunately, when the year came around, they started out 1-5. This team had strong individual performances from Lamar and Derrick Henry during this stretch, but they wasted it because of their inability to close out games. Lamar and Henry, they weren't blameless because they both committed plenty of mistakes, especially Derrick Henry. He carelessly lost multiple fumbles in games, including in the fourth quarter. And then by the time you get to week 4, when they had to go and visit the Kansas City Chiefs, the defense was so severely beaten up by that point that it was easy for Patrick Mahomes and the offense to pick them apart. But what made matters worse in that game was Lamar getting hurt with a hamstring injury late, and he missed the next 3 games, which contributed to that 1-5 start. Because in the next 2 games, John Harbaugh elected to put in the backup Cooper Rush. And unlike his time with the Dallas Cowboys, where he was clutch, everyone considered him a clutch backup, he significantly downgraded the offense as the defense also continued to struggle with injuries. So, yeah, the team got their butts whooped, and Rush's struggles continued in the Rams game that led to John Harbaugh benching him for the returning third stringer that some Ravens fans are familiar with, Tyler Huntley, who, while he didn't do much better in that game, but after the bye week, he did do better in the Bears game before Jackson returned the following week against the Dolphins to snap their skid. So they did a little bit better as the couple weeks went along, as they started to string together a run. But more on that in a bit. So the other thing I didn't like about the Ravens season was John Harbaugh's questionable usage of Derrick Henry, because Derrick Henry, despite his turnover issues, he still went on to have a great season. And Henry had just only one more lost fumble, and that was pretty much it. But his usage from Harbaugh was very questionable late in games. I found to be very weird. Like, you have an all-pro back that's having another great year, yet when it came to nut busting time, you don't use him. And the biggest case of this where I really got irritated by this was a must-win Week 16 game where they're playing the Patriots. And when after Henry got a goal line touchdown very early in the fourth quarter, he never saw the field again. And the failed usage of backup Keaton Mitchell, when that was downgraded to the running game, that allowed the Patriots to get red hot on both sides of the ball. And also remember the fact that Lamar got hurt too, and they had to use Tyler Huntley in that game in the rest of the game. So the offense couldn't get going, and they couldn't get, because John Harbaugh decided to, like, you know what, let's not use Derrick Henry. Yeah, the offense got stalled out, and the Patriots got red hot on both sides of the ball, and that led to the Ravens squandering a 14-point lead, and they lost the game. So John Harbaugh's usage of Derrick Henry, very questionable. But going back to that five game win streak, that after the 1-5 start, yeah, that was at least a positive for this team. Say what you want about this stretch and who they faced. The Ravens took care of their business, even with concerns still about, this team overall, especially Lamar looking a little bit sketch, especially with the limited mobility as the weeks progressed and some slow, sloppy starts in general. Meanwhile, when you look at the team that they were looking up at, the Pittsburgh Steelers, they were losing 3 of 5 games during this time, and that allowed them to catch up with them in the AFC North. So that was good news for them. And then, like I said, Derrick Henry, he was having a great season, like I said. And when it came to the month of December, their 5-game winning stretch, it was snapped with an embarrassing Thanksgiving loss to Cincinnati, which led to them losing the next 2 of 3. That included the most important one to the Steelers. But when it came to Week 17 and their season was on the line, Derrick Henry saved his best game for a must-win in Green Bay. And John Harbaugh finally realized this too. Going back to that negative of not using Derrick Henry for all 4 quarters, Derrick Henry went for over 200 yards, got 4 touchdowns in a big game over the Packers. And yeah, that was a game to save the Ravens season. And yeah, they got some help too from the skid marks and some ref ball though. That gave them a much needed game for a win or go home showdown with the Steelers for the division in Week 18. So give credit to Baltimore being able to overcome the early struggles to get to the point of fighting for the division at the very end. Both of them and the Steelers fought it out for all 4 quarters, especially when the two teams kept trading touchdown drives in the final frame. Like, who could forget Lamar finding Zay Flowers twice in busted coverage after they let Aaron Rodgers go on a kind of long scoring drive. But still, the Ravens found themselves down on their final drive after converting a wild 4th and 7 when it just seemed unlikely that they were gonna win that game, kind of like run out of chances. Yeah, they convert that 4th and 7, and all they had to do was have rookie kicker Tyler Loop, who replaced Justin Tucker, He just needed to make a 44-yard field goal to win the division. That's all he had to do, right? No pressure. No pressure, right? He was a mostly accurate kicker throughout the year. But unfortunately for Baltimore, the pressure was just too much for him. He looped it to the right. And yeah, their improbable comeback season ended in the most disheartening and kind of disappointing way that you can imagine. So yeah, their season ended on the very last play of the regular season overall too. But perhaps it was a blessing in disguise as they ended their season 8-9, as not only was rest needed, but they saw their coach John Harbaugh fired days later. Now, Harbaugh was great for the organization when he was first signed on in 2008, and he won them Super Bowl 47. But after that, he couldn't really get the team back to that point, back to another Super Bowl. And I don't think he got them back to the AFC. I know he got them back to one AFC championship game a couple years ago, but fell short. And the Ravens made it clear that a new voice was needed, who ended up being former Rams defensive coordinator and familiar defensive assistant of Harbaugh, Jesse Minter. So they got the new voice that they wanted, and Minter will now have the task to get this talent back to the playoffs and finally get over the hump that John Harbaugh couldn't in the last few years. But clearly there's work to be done with this team. So when you look at the offseason for Baltimore that is ongoing, they have a decent amount of cap space, but not by a lot. Around $22 million in spending money. And when you look at their first round pick, it's in the middle range, 14th overall. But they do have a lot of draft picks at their disposal, 11 picks total. So sizable amount of picks to use. And they're in the middle of the field. And looking at some of their free agents, you got safety Alani Gilman. The biggest one of all, though, is center Tyler Linderbaum, defensive lineman David Ojabo, and tight ends behind Mark Andrews, Isaiah Likely, and Charlie Kohler. So a couple of big names here for the Ravens that they have to consider re-signing. Some of the needs that they have to address, though, this past offseason, aside from trying to re-sign their free agents, they got to find better edge rushers because they had a lot of trouble pressuring opposing quarterbacks and sacking opposing quarterbacks. Mike Green was still developing and standout edge rusher Nimadi Madubike. He was nursing a serious neck injury for most of the past year. So, yeah, that didn't help at all either. Whether he's able to return, serious help is needed in order for Baltimore to even touch the quarterback. Then they got to find some better help within the interior O-line. Lamar was getting hit and sacked a lot this past year, even when center Tyler Linderbaum was there. He played a large majority of the games. Lamar was sacked 7 times in week 3 against the Lions, which that was the biggest indicator of how bad the interior offensive line was. So re-signing Linderbaum is a big priority for Baltimore. So even when they do re-sign him, upgrades are badly needed at the 2 guard spots around him. Then they also have to add some better depth in Lamar Jackson's supporting cast because outside of Zay Flowers, Derrick Henry, and Mark Andrews, Lamar doesn't have much help. And speaking of Mark Andrews, he's not getting any younger. And his backups in Likely and Kohler, they're free agents, and it might be hard to keep them around. And when you look at the rest of the receiving core, like Rashad Bateman, unfortunately, he's disappointing. I kind of hyped up Bateman in the last couple years on this podcast, but man, he's let me down a lot. So Lamar needs another quality deep downfield threat or two to elevate the offense alongside Zay Flowers. So Baltimore, it'll always be grateful for John Harbaugh and his 18 seasons that he was here, but it was time for a change. Expedional change. No, I'm just kidding. The Giants with the ad during their local games. But after a resilient yet somewhat slightly disappointing finish, it was time for a change. Jesse Minter has familiarity with this team. And with some money to spend, they got a bunch of draft capital. The Ravens could get the injection it needs to get back in the AFC playoff pool, as long as it addresses the needs that it needs to address. There had been a sense of urgency within the Tampa Bay Buccaneers fan base and outside of it, because this team has been a largely same roster with basically the same results in 2024, with the only difference being a first round exit at the hands of the Washington Commanders. So yeah, it was pretty much the same team since Baker Mayfield got here. And then, yeah, like I said, the previous year was just a first round exit, the only difference. So when you look at this point in time last year, a shakeup kind of was needed. Unfortunately, when you look at last offseason, there wasn't a lot of changes they were made by Tampa Bay, at least on the defensive side. And there was a lot of criticism for them at the time, using their first round pick on receiver Emeka Egbuka. I mentioned in my team preview back in July that Egbuka was pretty much needed in a good pick for Tampa Bay, because Mike Evans, Chris Godwin, they had some difficulty staying healthy in the last season in 2024. Especially Godwin with his injury that shouldn't have happened, let's be honest, in 2024, along with needed depth in general, even if it sacrificed defense once again. But still, they had a firm preseason chance winning the NFC South because of the other teams below them also not doing much else to improve their own chances at winning the division. So when you look at the Tampa Bay Bucks this past season, and what went well for them, Emeka Egbuka, he proved why he was drafted in the first round for Tampa Bay and why I had a nice belief in him. He stepped in very well as Baker Mayfield's preferred downfield choice, whether the supporting cast was dealing with injuries or was somewhat healthy, with his speed and openness, and yeah, just being that number one choice for Baker Mayfield. He unfortunately wasn't targeted as much. I'm not sure why that was the case in the back half of the season due to an eventually crowded receiving room. But he showed some promise that he was a reasonable number one first round pick in the first half of the year. I mean, not overall. I mean, trying to say first round pick. And then when you look at the other positives of this team, you look at on the defensive side in edge rusher Yaya Diaby. He was like an underrated underrated gem for me, in my opinion. Like, he was overlooked. Diaby continues to emerge as a front four centerpiece, like a young stud, and that comes with his aggressive, fast play style at the edge. As he finished the season with a lot of good aggressive pressure in quarterbacks, and garnering 7 sacks, and causing runners to lose yardage several times. So really impressed with the play of Yaya Diaby in his third season. But unfortunately for the Tampa Bay Bucks, it wasn't a good season for them. And why was that? Well, they started out what, 4-2 before the bye week. They started out pretty well for themselves, but unfortunately they self-destructed. After the bye week. Like, very strong start, just like in the last 2 seasons. But yeah, like they completely fell apart afterwards, unlike the last 2 seasons. And some will point out to a single reason why the Bucks fell apart. But for me, like, you can't really pinpoint like a specific reason as to why, because in my opinion, there's so many variables on what went wrong with this team throughout like that very bad stretch the rest of the way. One of those was the horrific pass defense. Like, the top need, like as I said, for the last 2 off seasons for Tampa Bay, I guess you could say 3 in Tom Brady's last year with the Bucks and the NFL in general, was that the Bucks just kept refusing to address the secondary, and it bit them in the ass again. There was more breakdowns in coverage, and I'm just not talking about deep coverage, just short coverage too. Jamel Dean, Jacob Parrish, and Antoine Winfield, they were having all kinds of weird mental breakdown coverages. And even during the first half of the year, it was very problematic. Although Baker Mayfield and the offense were able to save them in the clutch. But that was not present at all in the second half of the year. Speaking of Baker Mayfield, he did not play well in the final stretch of the season. He was looking like an early season MVP candidate with great accuracy, clutch time plays to Emmett Gabuka and Bucky Irving. But after the bye week, though, he was nearly the opposite of that. He was struggling with all that and being forced to throw balls away. And he was forcing errant throws and forcing turnovers and at bad times. And generally, he just wasn't connecting at all with the offense, which was kind of weird. And maybe the shoulder injury that he suffered in week 12 played a role in that. And yet also had another change in offensive coordinator in the offseason last year. So maybe all that played a role. And then you look at the injuries for this team. Many of the Bucs' key starters, aside from Baker Mayfield, picked up either lingering injuries that will hurt them in the end or season-ending ones. Like Mike Evans, he had a hamstring injury in week 3. He came back a couple weeks later, only to break his collarbone. That looked season-ending, but somehow he managed to return. And then you had Bucky Irving miss half of the season with shoulder and ankle injuries. And then you have Chris Godwin return from his serious ankle injury that he shouldn't have suffered in 2024. He came back in week 4, but then he only played half of the year. So for Tampa Bay, even though they were losing 5 of their last 6, somehow, some way, because the NFC South is the NFC South, they still had a chance to win the division. All they had to do was beat the Panthers at least once. They just had to split their final 2-game set to close out the season. So they managed to do that. But here's the kicker. Here's the kicker for them. It still wasn't enough because prior to that 2-game set, they lost both of their rematches to the Saints and especially the Falcons. Like those 2 games hurt them in the end. And that ended the 5-year hold on the NFC South by some weird 3-way tiebreak. Thanks to, that weird game between the Falcons and the Saints that determined the NFC South for either Carolina and Tampa Bay. And in the end, Tampa Bay was eliminated from playoff contention because, they didn't have the better 8-9 record than Carolina. So injuries surely played a role for this team, but they don't really have anything else, nor anyone else to blame but themselves for their self-destruction because they underperformed as a team, and Todd Bowles and his staff undercoached. Bowles wasn't fired for this, and I guess there's a little bit of reason for that. Although he did let much of his staff go, but this team still needs to take this off season seriously if it wants to compete with the rest of this division, which it could take a little bit of a step forward after what we've seen with Carolina, after what we've seen with the Saints, and some progress with the Falcons too. So looking at the offseason for the Tampa Bay Bucs, they don't have much cap space to work with, much spending money. They only have around $14 million. They have a decent amount of draft picks to work with. They have at the 15th overall pick, and they have 7 total draft picks. But they do have some decisions to make when it comes to their free agents. One of the biggest ones is Mike Evans. They have to make a decision on him. Corner Jamel Dean, linebacker Levante David, lineman Charlie Heck, and then tight end Cade Otton. So looking at some of the needs that they have to address in the next coming weeks and months, Baker Mayfield is eligible for a contract extension, but he really regressed in the back half of this past year. Although much of it had to do with playing through a shoulder injury, but still, the Bucs should be careful in making this decision still. So a decision has to be made on deciding whether to give Baker Mayfield that extension going into a contract year in 2026. Again, going back to Mike Evans, He's a free agent, but yeah, it's a decision that the Bucks have to make. He made his intentions to play next season, but still weighing his options as a free agent. He may not demand much, but he does have some considerations in mind, like wanting to play for a contender with a QB that can lead him and that team on a deep playoff run. Like, since Tom Brady left, he hasn't had one of those deep playoff runs. He's always been like a first round exit. Well, he did have one. He was one game short of the NFC Championship game in Baker Mayfield's first season with Tampa Bay, but that was as close as it got. But teams might be weary on paying him at least moderately due to 2 injury-riddled seasons, which includes Tampa Bay. But other than that, they got to revamp the defense, finally, for once. Jamel Dean and Antoine Winfield Jr. were great again last season, but they had no one else to work with. And Dean is also a free agent. Meanwhile, you look at the front seven. They were getting older. The front seven had trouble covering the middle of the field. Yaya Diaby was the only productive pass rusher. So they got to retool the front lines to better pressure opposing quarterbacks. They got to stop the run. They got to re-sign Jamel Dean and get him and Antoine Winfield the necessary help. So a major collapse should hopefully lead to a serious retool for this team, because the rest of this division, for how weak as it is, and yes, that even somewhat includes New Orleans Saints, it's going to be a little bit more competitive this coming September. But if the Tampa Bay Bucks refuse to fix that defense, especially, expect more of the same again this fall. The last 2 years felt like a retread for the Indianapolis Colts, going 8-9 and not getting anything out of their first round pick in Anthony Richardson. So the Colts were hoping for him to finally break out this past season in 2025. Instead, though, GM Chris Ballard took an interesting pivot. No, I'm not talking about the Triple H pivot, the swerve that you see on WWE Unreal for some stupid reason. Well, I guess you can maybe categorize that. But anyway, GM Chris Ballard signed former Giants quarterback Daniel Jones to compete with Richardson, and that suddenly became a hot preseason topic. And that especially rang true when Daniel Jones actually won the starting job over Anthony Richardson. And Colts fans were not happy about this at all. And they were already burying the season. They were already preparing for the worst for the Colts this past season. So, I mean, kind of understandable with those preseason expectations if you like time traveled back to August. But surprisingly, looking back at the regular season for Indianapolis, Daniel Jones actually played pretty well for himself to start 2025. Now, you can make an argument that most of it had to do with the mostly easy schedule, but schedule be damned. He was leading the Colts pretty well for himself. Led them on really good scoring drives, and outside of the 2 losses to the Rams and the Steelers, but he was still playing his butt off against the Rams. He was making fewer mistakes than he did when he was with the Giants. Again, outside of the Rams and Steelers games. And he had great connections with the likes of Jonathan Taylor, Alec Pierce, Michael Pittman Jr., and Tyler Warren in the passing attack. Daniel Jones playing with less fire and making fewer mistakes also opened up the running game more for Jonathan Taylor. And it eased a little bit of pressure off for Taylor, who had another great year, by the way. So Jonathan Taylor, he was once again the bell cow of the rushing attack and the receiving attack, but he had many big rushing games, especially late in the year where things, unfortunately, tailspinned for Indy. So after the bye week for the Colts, this team started out 8-2, but then the competition stiffened up, and despite their best efforts in the first 2 weeks post-bye, they were not able to keep up. And I guess, again, that goes back to the schedule. In the first half of the year, it was relatively easy, but when the competition stiffened up, they couldn't keep pace. Daniel Jones in the offense stalled out in key fourth quarter moments in spite of their defense's ability to keep the team alive. I mean, yeah, I mean, Daniel Jones and the offense were so, but not playing as well as they did in the first half of the year. But when you come to the crutch of it all, what was the very bad kicker of it? It was the injuries. Like the injuries made things worse for them. DeForest Buckner aggravating a neck injury he already suffered back in week 9. Charvarius Ward suffering multiple concussions that eventually placed him on IR out of his safety. And then when you get to the worst one of them all, you had Daniel Jones tearing his Achilles in Jacksonville in week 14. And that was basically it for the Indianapolis Colts. And once was a promising season for them. What felt like a season that seemed like it was finally gonna be done with the mediocrity and the the staleness for this team. So once Daniel Jones was done with for the season, the team that was already 8-5, they lost three straight when Jones tore his Achilles and Anthony Richardson was still on IR with a serious eye injury. Rather than leave the remaining hopes of the AFC South and their season on the hands of their undrafted rookie and Riley Leonard, they instead lured Phillip Rivers, their former quarterback, out of retirement. Yes, let's have Phillip Rivers, old Uncle Phil, who hadn't played in the NFL in 5 years, out of retirement. Yeah, good idea by the Charlie Ursay Gordon. like what are we doing here? So, I mean, let's be fair. Like, it was a fun ride. It was a fun 3-game ride to see old Uncle Phil try to sling it out for 3 games. Especially, the pressure-filled game against my 49ers in prime time, which, nobody expected. Unfortunately for Phillip Rivers, just having like less than a week to prepare, he just didn't have the arm strength to keep up in those 3 full games. And obviously, all those led to losses and resulted in the Colts getting eliminated for playoff contention. It was just only a matter of time for them. And then it's not just that. The desperation from the Colts, because of that, they pushed Phillip Rivers' Hall of Fame eligibility another 5 years back. Like, as if it was just a lose-lose for not just the Colts, but for Phillip Rivers too. Like, goddamn, man. So, for the Indianapolis Colts, they looked like the NFL's best team at the midway point of the year. And even with the rough 2-game losing streak after the bye week, they still had a chance to win a division and go on a run. I was one of those teams that, okay, maybe the Colts can turn things around. But the whole team didn't just slow down after the 2-game losing streak. They got completely blown up. Not just with how they were playing, but they got completely torn up like a hospital-ass team with injuries, especially to Daniel Jones, who actually provided some hope in Indy for the first time in a little while. So that's just very unfortunate for not just a team that had some hope, but for a quarterback that was revitalizing his career when he was essentially a bust with the Giants. So they once again finished 8-9. And you get an angry new owner in Carly Ursay Gordon watching, despite not taking any accountability herself after the season. So now you have general manager Chris Ballard and coach Shane Steichen having to make some tough decisions this offseason with the watchful, angry eye of Ursay Gordon to finally get this team on the right shoe, or else it's going to cost them their job. So looking at the offseason for the Colts, they have around $34 million to spend the next coming weeks, which is a solid amount. They don't have a first round pick, though. That's not the best case scenario for them because they used that first round pick on a bold trade to go and get Ahmad Sauce Gardner at the trade deadline. So they don't have a first round pick because that's going to the New York Jets. But they do have 7 picks overall. That their first actual pick is in the second round. But I mean, they still have a decent amount of draft capital still. So I'm looking at some of their key free agents. Obviously, one of them is Daniel Jones, the receiver Alec Pierce, D lineman Kwity Paye, Tyquan Lewis, and Samson Edward-Com, and O lineman Braden Smith. So that's actually some of the needs that they have to address here. You got a lot of key free agents here. One of those being Daniel Jones. They got to decide on how much they want to resign him. He played well for them, but he's rehabbing a torn Achilles. How is he going to play coming off that torn Achilles? Like, those are going to be two factors in re-signing him. But if both sides are going to play it smart, I mean, given the history of the Colts in the last decade or so, I mean, if they want my filthy casual opinion, go team friendly. Don't overpay, especially given that really bad injury. Like, don't be stupid, Chris Ballard. Just come to an agreement that, you know, you're coming off a torn Achilles. Just, you know, let's give him a 2-year prove it deal that you could still play well coming off that injury. And then in light of recent events, they got to find a trade partner for Anthony Richardson, which is, you know, unfortunate that the former 4th overall pick, well, they still allowed him to seek a trade, which ends an unfortunate tenure for a quarterback that just couldn't develop under Shane Steichen and was also injured too often. But he'll at least get a fresh start somewhere that Indy will send him his way for whichever team wants to take him on. If it's for him to start somewhere or as a developmental project. For a team that's going to have him compete for a starting role, think of the skid marks, the Jets, or the Vikings, or for a developmental project like either the Packers, the Rams, or the 49ers. Defensively, they got to address the front seven because they have a lot of free agents there, like Zaire Franklin, DeForest Buckner, and Lai Latu. The depth behind them is hitting free agency. So they gotta get better at all positions in both the pass rush and the run defense either way, but they gotta figure out who to re-sign internally. And then going back to the offense, Alec Pierce was the closest that they had to being a top receiver, but he's a free agent too. And even if they do re-sign him, they gotta find another top receiver because the current batch of receivers that they have, they've been falling flat. So many thought that this be the year where the Indianapolis Colts would at least make the playoffs with how they were playing for half of the year. But unfortunately, it was just the same results with flat play in the back half of the year, injury mania running wild, and a bunch of other key factors. Now they got many key free agents on both sides of the ball, and one can wonder if the Colts missed their best window to finally break the cycle of mid. The Detroit Lions, man, after a franchise best 15-2 2024, they suffered a disappointing upset loss to the Washington Commanders in their lone playoff divisional round game. And with that, they faced an offseason last year with inevitable changes that were coming. And in that offseason, they lost both their coordinators in Ben Johnson and Aaron Glenn to head coaching jobs. And rather than looking on the outside, they internally replaced them. And whether it was on the outside or in the inside, it was going to be a tough ask in adjusting to them. But unlike with a lot of people that were gonna question them, I mean, I still had questions though. I was willing to give them time. And while the window remained open this past season for Detroit to compete in the NFC and the playoffs, it was going to be up to everyone in staying healthy and them adjusting to their new coordinators. Unfortunately for the Detroit Lions this past season, both the sides of the ball, they just couldn't adjust to John Morn or Kelvin Shepard. Like, they all had a hard time, especially on offense, adjusting to Morn's new schemes, who wasn't as creative as Ben Johnson, which was a given. Let's be honest here. Like, John Morn didn't have the creativity or the uniqueness as Ben Johnson. Jared Goff and the offense struggled to maintain consistent drives following scores, and they struggled in the red zone pretty frequently. David Montgomery, notably, slowly started losing reps as the season progressed, as Jahmyr Gibbs was getting a lot better, and they deferred the ball more to him. And John Moran would eventually lose his play calling duties to Dan Campbell because of how stale the offense was, who outside of 2 games didn't make much of a difference as a play caller, which was an indictment of how stale the offense was and how broken it was. Meanwhile, Kellen Shepard's defense was slightly not as bad, but they were once again beaten up by injuries to the backfield. Like, you look at the secondary, DJ Reed, Terrion Arnold, Brian Branch, and Kirby Joseph, they dealt with short-term injuries throughout the year, while the latter 3, in Arnold, Branch, and Joseph, they were lost late in the year with season-ending injuries. And even when they were healthy early on, the defensive backfield was still pretty bad in coverage. Like, they could not cover like short or deep receiving threats. Like, it was just bad. And then meanwhile, you look at the offensive line. They did lose 2 key pieces in center Frank Ragnow and Kevin Zeitler at guard. But crazy how 2 key center pieces were still enough to hurt the offensive line against all types of defenses, like no matter how good or bad they are. Now, Jared Goff is not blameless for this, because he did held onto the ball too long at times, but Penei Sewell and Taylor Decker, they had no help from their interior counterparts. Like, the run game was also unable to get things going for the most part because Graham Glasgow, Tate Ratledge, and Christian Mahongi, that starting front, they couldn't set up run lanes. So not a great year for the offensive line for Detroit. And again, crazy how 2 key centerpieces was the catalyst for that by them being gone. But not all doom and gloom for the Lions, because when you look at a certain edge rusher by the name of Aiden Hutchinson, when he was coming off that ACL tear last year in 2024, and he's coming back this year, ready for the season opener. It took a bit of time for him to get going, but he eventually returned to his all-pro form with his high-pressure performances and finishing the season with double-digit sacks, and made the Pro Bowl. Was an all-pro player, so he performed pretty well in a bounce-back season. It's just a bit of a shame that he didn't get much help on the defensive front other than Al-Quaiden Muhammad. So that's a bit of a shame. And then you get the continued dynamic of at receiver of Amon-Ra St. Brown and Jameson Williams. They continue to outperform most of the time against opposing defenses, especially Jameson Williams, who had a career year as it continues to grow as a reliable deep threat for Jared Goff. With Williams' continued growth, it left Amon-Ra St. Brown more open to targets, and it created more problems for defenses because now you have this somewhat dynamic duo at receiver. So in spite of some silver linings, though, on both sides of the ball that I just mentioned, this team still took multiple steps backwards. And it was still expected because it's always going to be hard to, go from to try to like do better than a 15-2 record the previous year. But to take this many steps backwards, it's a little bit insane because of their inability to adapt to their new coordinators. And then you had injuries once again running rampant on that defense. Dan Campbell taking over play calling duties didn't help matters either, as the Lions finished a key final 5-game stretch 2-3. And that included a very bad and embarrassing Christmas Day loss to a Vikings team where they didn't have JJ McCarthy playing that game. They had backup Max Brosmer, who did his best Luigi wins by doing absolutely nothing game. And yet the Vikings still eliminated the Lions from playoff contention on Christmas Day on Netflix, of all games. Yeah, that happened for Detroit. So the Lions went to work already in trying to fix this team by firing John Moran and replacing him with former Cardinals offensive coordinator Drew Petzing, although I'm not sure how that's really going to be the best replacement, given that Petzing didn't really do that well with Kyler Murray and that Arizona offense. But still, it's one piece too many of what the Lions need to do to keep pace with the rest of the NFC North, notably with the Bears and the Packers. So when you look at the Lions going into these next couple of weeks in the offseason, they need to find a way to clear some room with their spending money because they're in the red right now with $9 million in debt. So they got to find some room to clear space. When you look at their first round pick, they're picking number 17th with 9 total draft picks. So yeah, a little late mid first round pick. Look at some of the key free agents. There are a bunch of them in the defense, like DJ Reader, Marcus Davenport, and Al Quaiden Muhammad. Linebackers, Alex Anzalone and Zach Cunningham. And corners, Amik Robinson and Rock Yassin. But going back to those key free agents and the needs that they have to address on this team, defense. They have some, like those names that I just mentioned, some of them are entering free agency, but a lot of them are replaceable. Yeah, Ian Hutchinson, Jack Campbell, and Malcolm Rodriguez, they're going to be the only pieces still under contract, but the ones that aren't, they're getting older. They get hurt often. I do think that out of all those names that I mentioned that are free agents, Al Quaiden should be the one that is resigned because he was a good piece alongside Ian Hutchinson this past year. And I do think that the Lions need to find younger, healthier bodies to help those three rush the pass and stop the run. So getting younger should be the goal for the Lions. Not just in the front seven, but in the defensive backfield too. That's the place where it needs to see major changes because they can't cover Jack there. And they also can't stay healthy. Like Brian Branch may not be available to start the season because he tore his Achilles late in the year. Terrion Arnold, he might get traded due to his lack of progression and his own health issues. And then DJ Reed, he only played half the season with a knee injury. Like they need to sign better yet healthier bodies that can match up with opposing offenses. Speaking of offense, they got to fix that offensive line. It took a major hit last offseason, and it suffered this past year, especially in the interior. Jared Goff needs better help up front, but no, like I think Taylor Decker announced his decision to come back this coming year. So that's one less need for the Lions to address. So basically all they need to do now is address the interior offensive line. So a disappointing follow-up for the Lions from 2024. And while it looks like their window for a deep playoff run is closing, there's still room for them in both a competitive division and the NFC as a whole. Dan Campbell and Brad Holmes, they just got to finally commit to fixing a defense that's been very broken in the last 2 years. If they want to compete, keep that window pretty open next season. Going into this past season for the Minnesota Vikings, they had a big dilemma on their hands after finishing their best campaign in forever in 2024 with the same record as the Detroit Lions at 13-4 or 14-3. Someone could correct me on that, but either way, they finished with their best campaign in forever, but unfortunately, they got their asses handed by the LA Rams in the first round of the playoffs. So they had a big dilemma on their hands. And that dilemma was either letting Sam Darnold go in free agency and stick with their first round pick in JJ McCarthy, who didn't play at all in that season because of a significant injury, or keep Sam Darnold and let JJ McCarthy continue to sit and learn. But alas, the Vikings elected to do the former. They let Sam Darnold go to the Seahawks for a big fat contract, and they are ushered in McCarthy time. It's McCarthy time in Minnesota. So most had the preseason expectations of the Minnesota Vikings not doing as well as 2024, but I talked about it in my preview for them. I thought it was okay. As long as JJ McCarthy provided their fan base the potential of him being a first round pick, living up to that that billing. And as long as he provided them some hope that he was going to be just fine. Unfortunately for JJ McCarthy and that Vikings fan base, he had an up and down season performance wise, showing that he can rally the offense in clutch time while also using his rushing ability to great advantage. But he also had the proneness and ability to turnovers. But the most concerning aspect for JJ McCarthy was his inability to stay healthy, because that's the biggest ability that you need to have, not just as a quarterback, but just as a person in general. You have to stay healthy. And that wasn't in JJ McCarthy's skill set, because I don't know if it was due to his play style or just bad luck. McCarthy wasn't able to stay healthy. He missed 5 games to a high ankle sprain, 1 to a concussion, and then he missed the Christmas Day game against Detroit with a throwing hand fracture, which also caused him to pull himself out mid-game in the finale against the Green Bay Packers. So his inability to stay healthy and available in a rapid trend, it's concerning going to next season. And when you look at the rest of the offense around McCarthy, his 50-50 play was really impacted. Now, coaching also played a role into this too, but McCarthy's development and his, well, I guess you could say developmental play, it hindered a lot of pretty like talented, loaded offense. Like you got the likes of Justin Jefferson, Jordan Addison, and TJ Hawkinson. They struggled all year because they never got in sync with JJ, who preferred other options like Jalen Naylor. The run game also never really got going too, with Aaron Jones and Jordan what was it? Jordan, like, I can't remember the other name, I'm sorry. But Jefferson in particular commented plenty of times all year how much the team struggled at quarterback with JJ McCarthy, which is kind of damning if you think about it. And then the offensive line was also not good. It adds on to the last point. But whether healthy or injured, they were within the bottom of the barrel in both run and pass blocking. Like they couldn't provide anything for Aaron Jones or I remember now, Jordan Mason, nor they could protect JJ McCarthy, which also contributed to McCarthy's health issues. Because part of it was the offensive line being bad. And then you look at the other things, like Kevin O'Connell, game Carson Wentz into very bad situations, which goes back to my earlier point about the offensive line. Like Carson Wentz had to start a couple of games because JJ McCarthy was hurt, but Wentz himself also got hurt in week 5, and yet he managed to play through his injury, which was a shoulder, but he's playing through he played through a shoulder sleeve, which even with the bye week, the next week, it still worsened in the next 2 games. The more he got hit, the more that the offensive line failed to protect him. And Kevin O'Connell, he didn't do anything until Wentz needed to get pulled. So Kevin O'Connell did do his due diligence when, like, the moment that Carson Wentz was starting to severely and progressively get worse with that shoulder injury, like, he didn't pull him until, like, Carson Wentz was like really needs to get pulled out. Absolutely stupidity on O'Connell there. But there was at least 1 or 2 silver linings with this Vikings team that kind of disappointed in 2025. And that was Brian Flores' defense. Like the front 7 under Flores was pretty good. With Flores' exotic hidden pressure calls and his blitzes in more than half of their games. Like when you look at that front 7 under Jonathan Allen, Andrew Van Ginkel, Dallas Turner, and Javon Hargrave, like they were really good in the pass rush. Like they had really nice ability to get to the quarterback, hit them under pressure, force them into really bad throws. And then like in the run defense, Blake Cashman and Ivan Pace Jr., they stuffed the run like right away. Now, they did struggle in pass defense for much of the year, but a crew led by Harrison Smith and Byron Murphy, they finished strong on their 5-game winning streak by only allowing 1 touchdown and got 4 turnovers overall. So for the Minnesota Vikings, their season went as expected, one of regression in proceeding with JJ McCarthy, who had a very up and down year, both performance and health wise, and that impacted the whole team. Well, some of which I expected. Still, they were somehow resilient enough to finish off on a very good note with a 5-game winning streak, which included upset wins over the Dallas Cowboys and the Detroit Lions, whom with the Lions, they eliminated from playoff contention and they swept the season series over. So for the Vikings, like they had a somewhat good end to their season. They finished 9-8 with the winning record. Some will say like it's a kind of a detriment to them, but I mean, in the end, it's still a winning record, I guess. Like it's a little bit of an overachievement despite some of the low expectations for them. So yeah, I guess you could consider it an overachievement. So they've already begun the busy offseason by making a good move in re-signing Brian Flores after some questions about whether he was going to go to a different team as a defensive coordinator or even as a head coach. But they managed to keep him around, and they actually made a big bold move in firing general manager Kwesi Adofo-Mensah a month ago. And the decision to fire Adofo-Mensah must have meant something happened that went wrong. Maybe it had to do with the drafting of JJ McCarthy and not keeping Sam Darnold around. But maybe it can also mean a major shift that's going to happen to this entire team. There's a lot of things that can mean something with that firing. So when you look at the Vikings for this offseason that is going to happen the next month, you look at their salary cap situation, like their money situation, not great. They're $40 million in debt. They're in the red, so they got to get some people out of there to clear some money. When you look at their first round pick, they're at 18th overall with 11 total picks, so they're at least good in draft capital. They don't have too many pressing needs. Like pressing free agents. The only ones of note are Eric Wilson at linebacker, corner Jeff Okudah, safety Harrison Smith, and receiver Jalen Naylor, JJ McCarthy's top weapon from this past year. The needs that they do have to address this offseason is the defensive backfield. For as good as Brian Flores' defense was this past year, it could continue to get better next season, but that has to start with the defensive backfield. Safety Harrison Smith is a free agent, but he's getting older and he could possibly retire. So help is needed in the deep end and at safety. So along with that, they need 2 more quality corners to help out Byron Murphy. So if they upgrade the secondary, then you could see a really good defense in Minnesota. And then on the offensive side, they need to add more depth behind Justin Jefferson and Jordan Addison. The interim GM needs to sign Jalen Naylor at his value, but even then, there needs to be more depth added behind JJ and Addison to better help whoever the quarterback is going to be. And why do I say whoever the quarterback is going to be? Well, recent developments have shown that the Vikings are considering a host of options for a new starting quarterback. And not a good sign for JJ McCarthy because it seems that the front office and Kevin Stefanski and his crew might have pulled the plug on the McCarthy era like very early. McCarthy time must be over with already. So the offseason is going to be a very interesting one for Minnesota and its fan base, as the narrative has suddenly shifted over towards the end game of JJ McCarthy's starting tenure very quickly. The roster building process under a new general manager is going to be one to watch, especially with the decision of who's the quarterback going to be this coming September. And that is a wrap on part 3 of our 2025 NFL season team recaps here on the Very Cold Lasagna Podcast. In this one, we talked about the Atlanta Falcons, the Baltimore Ravens, the Tampa Bay Bucks, the Indianapolis Colts, the Detroit Lions, and the Minnesota Vikings. It was an 8-9 conundrum here in this episode. And the back portion of it was the reverse of that, the 9-8, the 9-8ers. So yeah, it was like that middle of the pack situation, but in the wrong ways of sorts. But if you're a fan of these teams or you were on the outside looking in, let me know your thoughts on all 6 of these teams and what you thought went wrong for these teams and the silver linings for all of them. If you're watching this on YouTube, do it in the comments below. And if you're listening to this on audio, send me a message on my socials at Very Cold Lasagna, and we can have a conversation there. And yeah, what they need to do to get better this next season in September of this year. But that is it for this episode of the Very Cold Lasagna Podcast. I've been your host, Dylan Lasagna, bringing you all the filthy casual takes on the world of sports. Make sure to subscribe to the YouTube channel and hit the like button, hit the subscribe, turn on the notification bell. And if you're listening to this on audio, follow me there as well and follow my socials at Very Cold Lasagna on Twitter and Instagram. And keep that lasagna very cold in the fridge with your filthy casual takes on the world of sports. And until I see you, when I see you in the next one, peace out.